So Destiny Pharma listed on AIM in September. My background, I was at a biotech earlier this century for 10 years, which was also listed, then at Ergomed for 8 years and listed that in 2014, and then have come back to an exciting biotechnology company which is focused on the global need for new anti-infectives, antibiotics. There's increasing levels of resistance, and unfortunately that makes current drugs ineffective, and we're all exposed to infections, as we'll hopefully see in the presentation. So Destiny is clinical stage, so we're entering phase 2 next year. For those of you who are familiar with clinical studies, that is quite advanced, but of course there is still a long way to go through phase 3 studies before we have a product, so we're loss-making. But we have a lead asset which has very interesting drivers to move it forward through the clinical stage, and we believe we can bring a product to market and of course can generate significant value. The intellectual property is owned 100% by the company, albeit we now have a Greater China partner. It was invented by our founder, our Chief Scientific Officer, Bill Love, who's ex-Novartis. And again, the company is 20 years old, similar to the previous presentation, and has developed the asset over the years and is now well positioned moving into the clinic and also bringing forward the earlier assets. And of course, this is why we were able to list in September. We had good support from the city, and also signed a partner deal with our China partner, China Medical Systems, who are a $4 billion company listed in Hong Kong. So we're well funded and clearly positioned for developing the assets over the next 3 years. And obviously our lead program is focused on treating hospital infections such as MRSA. But it's interesting to look again at this whole area of antimicrobial resistance. It's one of the few healthcare issues which is listed at the G7, G20, WHO, alongside in the past AIDS, malaria, Zika virus. It's at the top table because it's a global problem. We have a growing population, an increasing number of operations, and unfortunately the superbugs are taking advantage of the global environment, and they are becoming even more resistant to existing drugs and indeed some of the new drugs. So resistance is a problem with pretty much all antibiotics. So we believe we're addressing that with our new mechanism and our new approach. Penicillin, which as I passed from Paddington Station today past St Mary's, you see the plaque on the wall, and discovered there in the 30s, 40s. Resistance was seen with penicillin within 5 years, and that is pretty much the trend with most antibiotics. Resistance is a big problem. They are effective, but quite quickly the bugs develop resistance. So it's a global problem, and it's increasingly we're seeing governmental support through the form of grants, regulatory initiatives to develop new anti-infectives, antibiotics. It was a forgotten area for 20, 30 years, probably from the 70s, 80s through to earlier this century, and now there's real pressure for companies, biotech and pharma, to try and do more, and we're one of those companies. So what's the advantage of our platform? You'll see the structure there. If there's any chemists in the room, there's if I can get the red dot, that's a porphyrin ring, and it has 2 arms which are positively charged. They bind to the surface of the negatively charged bacterial membrane and they kill it. It leaks very quickly, within 15 minutes. Some key components leak out and the bacteria is dead. That is ultra rapid. So one of the key advantages of our program, and there's a portfolio of compounds with the same mechanism, is rapid action. So if you kill a bacteria rapidly, it doesn't have a chance to become resistant. And that is another key asset that we believe we have with our approach, which is a clear advantage to current antibiotics. There are a whole range of bacteria. They're described based on the membrane, simply speaking, as gram-negative, gram-positive. We have activity against all gram-positives and some gram-negatives, and things such as biofilms, which is where bacteria hide away, be it in hip implants or indwelling catheters, and the bacteria sleep there in these bunkers and then pop out every now and then and get infections. So they're very resilient, very creative, and this makes them a very hard target for drug developers. But we believe we have a new class, we have very good IP, and we have good data supporting our lead program. It's killing the bugs rather. It's very safe, and it has this low, no resistance profile, which is we believe is unique. So the classical biotech slide, this is our pipeline. As you see, our lead program is a nasal formulation. This is a nasal gel, which we'll come to, for the decolonization before surgery to reduce your chances of post-surgical infection. That's heading into phase 2. Results will come in 2019. That's all fully funded post-IPO. And we're also looking to bring through earlier assets for the decolonisation of the throat and indeed treatment of burns and wounds, where again you get very nasty infections. And we've done some work with the US military there, and we will carry on progressing those studies. But the key value driver is our lead programme, which is for the nasal decolonisation of Staphylococcus aureus, which a third of the population, so a third of the people in this room, will be carriers of Staph aureus in our noses. It's also in your armpits and your groins. That doesn't really bother you, but if you're going in for an operation, as you can see, if you're a carrier, you have a 10 times greater risk of post-surgical infection. One type of which is MRSA, that's methicillin-resistant Staph aureus. There's also all other types of Staph aureus infections. And if you can reduce that nasal carriage, you can reduce post-surgical infection in these carriers by 60%. And this is in all of the leading guidelines, that the decolonisation of Staph aureus prior to surgery reduces your chances of post-surgical infection. If you get an infection, you're very ill, you can die, it costs the hospital money, you're in the hospital longer, and if you had a hip implant, probably means your hip has to come out again and you won't have another one. So the actual implications of surgery and the risk of the actual surgery itself are of course exacerbated by the potential for infection. And this drives the potential market, because there is of course an increasing number of operations. There are new technologies, new developments, which means all of us across the world, and this is a global problem, will be having more operations, which means there is more risk of post-surgical infection. And we can see building up through the number of eligible procedures and a sensible pricing, we can see a market in the US of $1 billion. And we're targeting the US with our lead program initially because there isn't an approved drug in the United States. Mupirocin, an old GSK antibiotic, is used off-label. So again, this is a nasal gel that we would have the day before, or 5 days before surgery in their case, which will decolonise your nose, which means you have less chance of infection. It sounds pretty simple, but the fact is your nose, if you're a carrier, is the main source of your post-surgical infection. It is not a dirty doctor's tie, or a dirty nurse, as it were, or having dirty hands. The fact is it's your nose. We're our own worst enemies if you are a carrier, and a third of the people in this room are a carrier. Day to day, doesn't bother you. You're going for an operation, you're at risk. Drivers for adoption. So people who have looked at the sector before will say, well, antibiotics, they're cheap, you're not supposed to use them, how do you make money? Well, the fact is people are making money. Cubis in the States a few years ago was bought for several billion by Merck because they had a new class of antibiotics. Obviously in phase 3 it was much later stage, but it shows there is value out there. There are lots of drivers for adoption, because obviously the story I'm giving you about the need, the global need, governments are supporting companies to develop through grants, also through the regulatory environment, being more receptive and encouraging companies to develop new drugs, but also in the States especially, there are penalties. So there are penalties in terms of fines for hospitals who have high infection rates. I mean, I used to live in Cambridge. Addenbrooke's a couple of years ago had a terrible couple of years where it had cases of MRSA and wards being shut down. Well, this is all now measured across hospitals across the world, and very, very clearly, if you have high instances of post-surgical infection, you are fined. So it's costing hospitals money. And the actual treatments, such as ours, are actually relatively inexpensive. You're talking about a treatment cost of maybe $200 in a total operation cost of several thousand. So there's some key drivers for adoption, which we believe are good timing for us in terms of as we bring our drug to market. The commercial market is increasingly recognising the need for drugs such as ours. We have the support of the FDA. We've been awarded a QIDP, which is a special status they award to drugs in this area because they're trying to encourage new developments in new antibiotics, new anti-infectives. This was awarded before I joined the company back in 2015. It means we have an open dialogue with the FDA, and indeed the FDA also paid for the last study that was done and completed in 2016. So the company is targeting the USA with its lead program, but also has very good relationships with the FDA, who of course will control the clinical studies and indeed any eventual approval of a drug. But we, from the FDA, have this QIDP, and they have given us the unique indication for the prevention of post-surgical staph infections. No other drug has that at the moment. So if we're successful, we will be the gold standard. This is some data on the resistance story. So a key problem with antibiotics is that they work very well at the beginning, and then over time they begin to fail because you see resistance developing. And what this chart is showing, this is a standard microbiological test, is that across the bottom here you see these passages, and this is where you have a petri dish with your bug, you apply your antibiotic, and it kills them. But it never kills all of them. There's always a few left. So you grow those up again, and then you try and kill them again. And over time, after 3 or 4 passages, say, exposures, you begin to see here, you go north on the chart with these grey and then the sort of the purpley blue dots. These are well-established antibiotics where they begin to fail, and every antibiotic fails in this test. But our drug class here on the bottom has been exposed 55 times, which is the longest ever published study of this type, and we have never seen resistance. You see a little bit of wobbling around the line, but basically that is no resistance. Due to that ultra-fast action, we believe our drug is a unique mechanism when the bug is not having a chance to develop resistance. We would never say you will never see resistance, because these are super bugs that are incredibly adaptive and really are challenging, but definitely we see a clear window for us to effectively commercialise and make money with our drugs due to this unique profile. And we're beginning to see this now with samples from humans in the studies we're carrying out. So again, we're building the story here. We've been in clinical studies already with our lead program. It's already been in several studies you see here. The last study was funded by the US government. Basically, it's the active drug in a nasal gel in a jar. You have a pea-sized dose which goes into each nostril. You rub it, and that is your decolonisation. You do that twice a day, the day before surgery. And here you see a clear reduction. The light blue bar, call it a bar on the left, is before, and the purple is after. And these are log scales. This is a dramatic reduction in the total number of bugs in a subject's nose. And we've been in over 200 patients. It's very safe. It stays localised. It's not absorbed into the bloodstream. This is the study that was carried out by the FDA, which basically is the basis for moving forward to the IPO. On the left, you see placebo, which is that nasal gel without the active drug. You see some reduction, as you'd expect. If I blow my nose, I'm going to lose some bugs if I'm a carrier. But the black bar line across there shows, is it clinically relevant? And it's only if you're below the black line that you're clinically relevant. You're actually having a clinically significant reduction. And with our drug, hold it, where am I going? With our drug there, you can see clearly 1 day and then 5 days, we have a clear reduction. If you were in a hospital and you have the standard screening, they would say you were clear. Here you are failing. So this was the data which was very clinically significant and also statistically significant, which is the basis for our funding, as it were, the IPO, where we're now going to go into 200 patients in America and also do a standard derma study over the next year and a half. And basically that will deliver a package which is then ready for phase 3 studies. And we have the option then of doing those studies ourselves or indeed partnering. And I come back to the fact that we also, at our IPO, did a partnering deal with China Medical Systems, who are listed in Hong Kong. They're a specialty pharma company selling drugs in Greater China. They have 2 or 3 interests in development companies, one of which is Pharma Oncology, which is listed in London. And they validated, we believe, our approach in terms of they see value in what we're doing. They see that they can potentially help us eventually sell the drugs in Greater China. And they've also invested £6 million in the company. We've had 3. Another 3 million will come when we close the full deal towards the end of this year. There's a summary here. Sorry, I've talked about that before, but that's in the slides. We've also obviously tested the profile of our drug in the US market, and hopefully as it's coming across, it tests very well because it's killing all strains of Staph aureus, whereas the sort of competitor, and there isn't really a competitor, this is off-label use of mupirocin, doesn't kill all strains. We have this resistance story, which is unique. We only need 1 day dosing compared to 5 days. We have a novel action. And also we have the sort of validation from the FDA of our approach of this target indication. So again, commercially it's testing very well in the market with doctors, anti-infective specialists. They want something new, and we're delivering to that profile. We also have a platform though, so I won't talk about this too much, but we have a platform of drugs, and as is often the case with the novel platform, you can go in various directions. Yes, we're focusing here on nasal, surgical prevention, and indeed respiratory in the intensive care units, where if you're a carrier in the throat, you can develop pneumonia. But also we have a treatment for burns wounds, where we've done some work with the US military. Again, our product works very well there, very safe. And indeed earlier developments in things like biofilms, which are associated with diseases such as cystic fibrosis, hip implants. And there are other areas we can move into. And over time now, with the funding, we can develop the earlier programs. And also we can sign up partnerships, which we will look to do and announce those in due course over the next 2 years. There's some slides here on the earlier programs. This ventilator-associated pneumonia, if you go into an intensive care unit and you're a carrier in the throat, you have a 15 times greater chance of developing this pneumonia, which has very high mortality, so a clear link there. In fact, a company has just listed in the US in the last month purely with this as its lead program. So a competitor, but it validates that this is a very large market, whether it's $1 billion or definitely a $500 million market to address. No drugs are really working in this space at the moment. And then this is the data around the early wound program I won't go into. All I'd say is that the US military has billions of money which it allocates to grants for research into areas where it has interest, including burns and wounds for the treatment of infections. We will be reapplying and potentially have more grant non-dilutive funding to come to help us progress our programs, albeit with the money from the IPO we can do that independently as well. We have good intellectual property going out to 2030s, which we will look to extend. All major territories covered. News flow, always a challenge for a small company, but we'll be looking obviously to start studies, report data, but the key data at the moment is coming in 2019, but we'll be looking to surprise the markets by other activities in the meantime. Again, we have the funding and the assets, we believe, to deliver that. We have done one deal, of course, already with China Medical Systems, so we've shown that we can do partnering deals, and there will be more to come there, I hope, in the future. And alongside that, we have the external news from the whole global awareness of antimicrobial resistance and the problem that exists. There's, every 2 weeks there's an article somewhere, be it the Sunday papers or this week Cowen in the US. Cowen, a specialist healthcare bank, they put out a big piece on antimicrobial resistance and what's going on in the US market. So we believe there's a wave of interest, and we're riding that wave with our program and our unique portfolio. So we're well funded, which is important. We won't be coming back to raise money in the next 2-3 years unless, of course, something exceptional happens, a new asset appears, or we buy a company, which I think is unlikely. We are looking to deliver on with our current pipeline, deliver that data. The lead asset is clearly defined, has some great data historically, and we're now looking to effectively repeat the last study in patients in the States next year, reporting results in 2019. We have the earlier assets where we'll be looking to do deals and bring those forward, good IP, and blockbuster markets. The markets we're talking about are billion-dollar markets, and we listed, I think, share price 157. We've had some sellers, 80% are locked in, but some of the longer-term shareholders have sold down, so we're quite good value at the moment. But definitely, we don't need to worry about the share price too much. It's all about delivering clinical data, proving that we can deliver what we said we do, and like I say, funding for the moment has been resolved, so we're in a very good position. I think I've been in other biotechs, and this is the best funded company I've been in, and we're looking forward to 2018 into 2019 and taking the company forward.